So I'm going to ask you to open your Bibles up to Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3. And I'm going to just spend some time out and walk through our testimony with you. But I want to talk to you about how do you face an uncertain tomorrow? How do we face an uncertain tomorrow? How do we do this? How do we face an uncertain tomorrow? Exodus chapter 3, verse 13 simply says this. Then Moses asked God, if I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? God replied to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. That's interesting, isn't it? Because think about that. By the way, if you look at Jehovah's Witness Bible, they take that out.
That's right.
Because that shows that God the Father is part of the Trinity, just as God the Son, Jesus Christ, I am the bread of life in the New Testament. And they take that out. I know because I was sharing the gospel with a Jehovah's Witness one day, and I just went through this Bible. Verse 15. God also said to Moses, say this to the Israelites, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, and the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is how I am to be remembered in every generation. And what I want to do is I share this in my class, but I want to just talk to you about what does it look like to face an uncertain tomorrow. You have to ask some questions, first of all. Think about this for a moment. Is it safe to go to school? I mean, we had never heard of school shootings until Jonesboro, Arkansas happened in the early 90s. They just recently commemorated the day that Columbine happened. I remember that happened because I was in Nashville, Tennessee at my preacher revival for my mom and dad's church in the late 90s. My wife called me and she said, you got to watch on TV. I mean, it's hard for this generation to understand. We didn't grow up that way. We never saw that happen in school. And it's a regular thing that happens all the time. How about this? Is it safe to go to work? Well, ask the families of the 3,000 people that died at 9/11 if it's safe to go to work. Literally every day we pick up, we see something on the internet. We read something about someone going back into a business and shooting someone because, they're mad because they got fired. Is it safe to go to church? I mean, goodness gracious, or any house of worship for that matter. Look what happened yesterday in California. I mean, I just moved to Fort Worth, Texas in 1999. I was teaching at Southwestern Seminary. And my wife came and pulled me out of church one night to show me live reports of what was happening at Wedgwood Baptist Church. If you've not read that, you can read that. They had a videotape of this after a couple of years ago, but they finally destroyed the videotape. But basically, a man came into the church. He saw that we have a prayer service celebrating See at the Pole. There would be a youth there. He walks into the church. He shoots the children's minister of the church, and then he turns back around and he shoots one of the custodians of the church, who's one of our students. He killed the children's minister. One of my good friends, Kevin, was on staff there. He's a staff counselor. We were in the doctoral program together. And Kevin comes running down the hall. He's a big guy, played football in Texas. And just, he shot Kevin. Kevin's the one who told me kind of what happened. Kevin fell to the ground. He couldn't move. The man walks into service and walks up front, says something to the people up front, walks to the back, pulls a gun out and starts beating on the door. Turns around and starts shooting. First person he shoots is the guy who's doing the videotaping upstairs, because he's waving for everybody to get out of there. He sees what's happening. They found this young man later on, they bled to death. He turns to the crowd and begins to shoot. He shoots a young girl named Kim Jones. I interviewed Kim a week before. She'd just come off the mission field. She'd been a journeyman with IMB in Eastern Europe. In fact, it was interesting because about a month after she died, her mother came to Southwestern Seminary and brought a videotape of the last Bible study she taught when she was at Southwestern, before she left the mission field. And it was, oddly enough, it was about being prepared for anything that would come in the future. So she took a backpack up to the pulpit and she would pull things out and she would apply what Paul would talk about, being prepared for every situation. At the very end of it, the backpack is empty, and she says, there's one more thing you need to understand. She said, I am convinced that pretty soon it's going to require the cost of our lives in order to defend our faith.
Right.
2 months later, she would die going to a service like that, taking her youth group to it. Man turned from the crowd and shoots a young girl named Cassie. She fell over to the lap with her best friend. Her best friend's father was one of my friends on campus. He was a professor. Doug told me later, he said his daughter didn't want to get up and leave her friend even though she was dying in her arms. She turned around and looked at the man and began to shoot at her. She was convinced that would be her last day. And he missed her. And while she was watching, he turned the gun on himself and shot himself. You can go to that church today, and there's a memorial outside to all 7 people who lost their lives. Thousands of others were impacted. Look what happened to Sri Lanka just a couple of weeks ago. Guys, it's a secular church. How do we live in a world like we live in today? How do we face an uncertain tomorrow? Well, if you look at Moses, he gives us really a prescription of how we do that. God comes to Moses in Exodus 3, and he's before the burning bush. You've read the story. You've heard the story since Vacation Bible School days when you were a little kid. You probably saw it on a felt board somewhere when they did it. You know? But here's what he told them. See, he sees a bush burning. God begins to speak to him out of that bush. And God says, remove your shoes, you're on holy ground. And Moses begins to listen to God. Moses has been gone some 40 years from when he killed an Egyptian guard and fled out into the wilderness. And now he's working with his father-in-law, tending his livestock. He's got a pretty cushy job. We don't have to do a whole lot. He's okay. He's not under the stress he was when he was back under Pharaoh's reign. But God comes to him that day and he says, guess what? I've heard the prayers of my children who are in Egypt. And you know, Moses' heart had to jump out of his chest thinking, yes, finally you're going to deliver them. And he says, and oh, by the way, Moses, there's one little caveat here I've told you. I'm going to send you back. I prepared you in Pharaoh's courts. You know the language. You know the culture. You're the one I'm going to send back to them. Did Moses jump at that and go, yeah, I'll do it? No. He said, Lord, who am I that I should go before the children of Israel? What did God say? He says, Moses, don't fear, don't worry, for I will do what? You remember what it says? I will be with you. Guys, that is a recurring theme all the way through Scripture. Joshua 1, where Moses passes away and Joshua is to take the children of Israel into the promised land. What does he say? He says, don't fear, Moses. Don't fear, Joshua. Don't worry. For every foot where your foot shall trod, that place shall be yours. I will be with you. What did Jesus tell his disciples? He said, don't fear. I will never leave you nor what? Forsake you. Now, he goes to verse 13. He gives a series of excuses. And the second one really gives us a picture of how we face an uncertain tomorrow. For he says, but God, when I come over the children of Israel and they ask me what name, who you are, what shall I tell them? He says, well, just tell them I am have sent me to you. I am. Now, if you look at, actually, I'm reading from the Holman Christian Bible, and it actually corrects this in verse 13, which is good because it uses the name Yahweh. That's really what the name is, YHWH. There. And so he says, in other words, tell them Yahweh has sent me to you. Yahweh has sent me to you. God has sent me to you. And you know, it's interesting because names don't mean a whole lot to us, do they? How many of you are named after a family member who didn't want that name in? We're talking about, you know, it's usually the middle names. That's why we put our initial. We don't ever tell them what it is. You know, it's true. And so, you know, you think about it. Names don't mean a lot. My grandmother was a twin. I'm from Tennessee. Her name was Lassie Lorel. Her sister's name was Leslie Rosa. That's child abuse. You don't do that to your children. I knew some guys when I was in junior high. They were twins, and their names, I kid you not, were Fred and Freddie. That's how Mama got confused. All right, I don't know how that happened, but listen, names don't mean a lot to us. But think about this: the name Isaiah means the salvation of Yahweh, the salvation of God. The very name Isaiah defined the ministry, defined the man Isaiah. defined his purpose and what he would do. So what he was, you see, his identity was found in his name, the salvation of Yahweh. But we don't have, in fact, we basically don't have another book in all the Old Testament that has more pointing towards becoming suffering servant, the Lamb of God, the Lion and tribe of Judah, the root of David, than the book of Isaiah. It defined the message of Isaiah. So what he was saying, can you deliver, God? So what does God do? He stamps it with his name. So what does the name Yahweh mean? Well, it's real simple. If you look at it, he says, tell them the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, has sent me to you. And why is he pointing them backwards? Because the Jews, unlike us, were trained to look at the future by marching into the future. The Jews were trained to look at the future by putting their back to the future and looking to the past. The Jews did not know what tomorrow would bring, but they always knew who brought them. They never forgot who brought them. That's why they had all those feasts. You just thought it's because they were just kind of precursors to all the Baptists and they have all these covered dish meals, right? That's not what it is. What they're actually doing is celebrating their approach. They're looking back and saying, if God delivered Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob yesterday, he can deliver us today, no matter what tomorrow will bring. That's what he was saying to them. So what does the name Yahweh mean? Well, it means this. It means I will always be what I have been. I will always be tomorrow what I have been yesterday. You cannot take God and put him into one time frame, for he transcends all of that. So it means I will always be what I have been. So listen to me, church. We can look at our world and we can say, man, look how horrible our world is. But look back to how God has delivered us. That's why Jesus told his disciples to always celebrate the wonders of God. That's why we're always supposed to look back and to see what God has done. Has God delivered us in the past, yes or no? Then trust him to deliver us today. And by his very nature, listen to this. Before Moses knew of the plagues, before there would be a Red Sea, before there were the famine out in the wilderness, before all of those things they would face, guess what? Moses knew he could step into tomorrow. Why? Now get this. He could step into tomorrow because the moment he got there, he discovered that our God's already there. Mm-hmm. He's already there. You see, God's not surprised. He is the rock that delivers us. No matter what you're facing, God is already there. Amen. He knows exactly what you're going through. He is already there. I'm going through financial issues. Well, trust him. Because when you get to tomorrow, our God is already there. One way or the other, he will be with you. I was talking tonight to my best friend I've had for 35 years. His name's Carl. And I would ask you to pray for him. He's had prostate cancer for almost 12 years now. His PSA is right now over 300. The cancer is beginning to metastasize in his bones. Carl's wife is a medical doctor. Carl at the most probably has 6 months to a year to live. We believe God can heal them. Amen. So I would ask you to pray for Carl. But when we talk tonight, Carl's asked me to do his funeral. It'd be hard because, I mean, I've known Carl for so long. We've literally traveled everywhere together. But you know what Carl's thing was? He said, David, if God delivers me now, that's fine. But if he don't, then I'll greet him. And then it'll be okay then. Either way, to live as Christ, to die as well. Amen. Amen. Our God is already there. Now, I found this out of what happened in my life years ago. Back in 1989, I always share this with my classes. Back in 1989, my wife became pregnant with our second child. About 6 months into this, it was the week before Thanksgiving, 1989, Debbie wasn't feeling well. I took her to urgent care. They sent her home. I took her to the emergency room. They sent her home. I went back to my church to let them know I was going to be moving to a new church. And we were in Texas. I went back to my church to let them know that Daddy wasn't feeling well, so she stayed home. I took my 2.5-year-old daughter Dana with me. I called Debbie that night to make sure she was okay. I'm fine. Called her the next morning. She was okay. Called her the next afternoon. She was okay. That night when I walked in our apartment, what I found forever changed our life. You got to understand, like I mentioned to you today, I was 28 years old at that time. Debbie and I went out on our first date when I was 14 years old. I told my father I was looking across my science class. I went to the elementary school with Debbie. We did everything but kindergarten together. I remember looking across my class and seeing this beautiful brunette girl. I noticed Debbie before, but not like that day. That day, she was the first time anyone I'd ever seen look better in football, okay? And man, I went home that night and I said, Dad, there's a beautiful brunette girl in my class. My dad, like I said, is a big old guy. I said, Dad, if I can get her to go to a football game on Friday night, will you pay her way and take us? Because if you don't have wheels and money, you're not going anywhere, right? My dad started laughing so hard he rolled off the couch. As I best remember, he kind of bounced. And he looked at me and he just laughed really hard. He said, son, if you can find a woman that dumb, that blind, and that desperate, sure, I'll take you. Because it is the job of our fathers to build up the self-image of our children, right? That Friday night, we went on our first date. We went together. We didn't go anywhere for about a month, and we broke up. 2 years later, we started dating again when I was in 11th grade. I escorted Debbie at homecoming and all that kind of stuff. And the rest is history. When I walked into our apartment that night, Debbie was bent over a trash can coughing up blood. She was pregnant, about 6 months pregnant. She wasn't feeling really well. We got to the hospital as soon as we could the next morning. They put her in kind of a mid-level ICU unit. Monday went by, Tuesday went by. Wednesday morning, I went in. They went into Debbie's lungs with a probe to try to figure out where the bleeding was coming from. The doctor, Dr. Nickel, who was a deacon in a local Baptist church there in Fort Worth, walked out. He was kind of our father through all of this. He said, David, I need to tell you what's really going on. I'm just going to be straight with you. He says, we don't know why Debbie's bleeding. We don't know how to stop it. We don't know why it started. He said, all I can tell you is if she doesn't stop bleeding soon, the first thing she's going to do is her body's going to grow so weak, she's going to miscarry that baby, and the baby's going to die. And she will die soon after that. And guys, up until that time, my ministry or my life had been so much about me. I wasn't a good father. I wasn't a good husband. I wasn't a good person. I had a guy that I taught at Southwestern back in 1999 and 2000 who walked up to me, and he knew me prior to this happening. He walked up to me after class one day, one of my students. He was going to go be a missionary in China. He looked at me and he said, it's interesting that I see you teaching, David. I said, how's that? He said, because when I was here, you were the biggest jerk I knew. He said, I knew that because I was the second biggest jerk. That's what he said. He wasn't far off. I saw ministry and God as a way to basically make lots of money and become my own legend in my own mind. And what happened was that day when I heard that for the first time in my life, I did something I've never done. I started to cry, not because I broke a bone. I started to cry because my heart was broken. So I did what every self-respecting man here would do. I went over the phone, picked it up, and I called my mom. Because I'm a mama's boy. Mom hopped on the next plane and flew out to Texas. The next day was Thanksgiving in 1989. They moved Debbie to a full ICU unit. The doctors were doing testing on her, still didn't know what was going on. Friday went by. Saturday morning, I took my 2.5-year-old daughter in to see her mother. We pulled the curtain back. They had Debbie sitting in a chair with tubes coming out of her. And she was wheezing for every breath she could get. The moment she saw Debbie, saw her mom, she began to scream and holler and say, Mommy, 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 Mommy. And I had to drag her out of that room. Debbie was crying. I was crying. Dana was crying. Then it didn't settle down. I got her down the lobby and I drove her to the airport. And those days we could go back to the gate. I remember sitting back at the gate. Debbie's dad and stepmom met us at the airport to take her back to North Carolina. And I held on to her to the very last moment before they put her on the plane. I remember walking out and saying, Mr. Weaver, we got to go. And I walked over and I watched Dana go down that little ramp, and she was carrying something, and she turned around and looked at me as if to say, Daddy, why are you abandoning me? And I said, sweetheart, just go with Grandma and Grandpa. I will call later and let you know how Mommy's doing. The moment she went around the corner, I ran out the car. I turned the car on and I had a Christian radio station on it. It was an old Wayne Watson song talking about watching your children grow up and play in the front yard and wondering who they would marry one day. And as I started driving out of the parking lot, my thoughts were with that little girl, Dana. And as I got closer to Fort Worth, I started thinking about the baby. When I got back that night, the doctor said, we're going to have to put Debbie into a chemically-induced coma, or she'll die tonight. She'll just be too weak. I remember holding on to her hand while they were intubating her and filling her full of morphine. And this is how far I was. I didn't even know what to say to her. We were in a situation where I may not ever be able to tell her I love her again. You see, when you're so consumed with yourself, you miss the blessings around you. Humility is not this false kind of idea of playing games. It comes from the brokenness of what God allows us to go through. We have to embrace those things. That night, I thought about this later. She could have easily died, and I could have never told her again how much I love her. That's what happens to us when we get so consumed with ourselves. Sunday went by, Monday went by, Tuesday, Debbie began to bleed out of her kidneys. She was dying. The doctors gave her less than 25% chance of living. Wednesday, got really cold in North Texas, had an ice storm. We snuck out of the hospital just long enough to go grab a bite to eat. I got back to the hospital that night about 7 o'clock. The nurse met me and she said, Mr. Wheeler, the doctor's been looking for you for hours. Keep in mind, we didn't have cell phones in those days. So I went into Debbie's room, and there was just, I've got a picture of this. There was one light in her room right behind her. The only sound was the respirator. The only movement was her chest going up and down. I remember I walked in and put my hands on top of her hands. They were cold and stiff. And it hit me. What was going on? I looked at her and began to tell her how much I loved her. It must have went on 10 or 15 minutes. And then I realized she couldn't hear a word I was saying. Let me just say this to you. Regret does not make a good meal. And you're so consumed with you lose perspective of God and everybody else. That moment I realized exactly where I was. The doctor walked in, he said, Mr. Wheeler, we now know what Debbie has. They got one of the test backs. We're going to have to give her a large dose of chemotherapy. We don't know what to do to your baby. You'll have to sign for us to do this. Remember, I walked out in the hall, and nurses gathered around, and I cried. And God took me back to this passage. And he said, trust me, for I will always be what I've been. Trust me. I went over to sign that sheet of paper, went back in Debbie's room and put my hands on Debbie's stomach and felt the baby kick for hours while they gave her her first dose of chemo. Because I didn't know if I'd ever know that child alive. About 3:30 in the morning, Debbie's mom came and drove me out, made me go home. I went home and slept for a couple hours, came back the next day. At 6 o'clock that night, I couldn't control my emotions. I was done. All I wanted to do was cry. I went home that night and locked myself in the back room of my apartment. And those 4 or 5 hours in that room transformed the rest of my life. As I laid on that carpet. By the way, we talk about revival, but we're not willing to do the things that bring revival. There has to be an emptying of ourselves completely. And I laid there. If I could have liquefied myself in that carpet, that's how low I felt. I lay there before God for hours, confessing my sin, my arrogance, my pride, praying for my wife, my kids. Just weeping, broken. As a control freak, I couldn't do anything to fix it. And God was asking for total trust from somebody who, quite frankly, just never trusted anyone. And I surrendered. It was the most amazing thing. It was like I was falling off a building. And I was about to hit the ground when these big hands reached out and picked me up. And it was like the most stable but unstable sensation I've ever had in my life. And I remember I was wanting to kind of gather around and grab hold of something. And it was like God yelled at me or spoke to me and just simply said firmly, David, stop grabbing hold of this world. Hold on to me. Trust me. I will always be what I've been. Trust me. Now let go. That moment changed the rest of our life. Debbie and I jokingly say that we have both been married to 2 different people. She's been married to the same man for 35 years. There was a man before that, and there was a man after that. I've been married to the same woman for 35 years. There was Debbie before that, there was Debbie after that. I thought things would get better, by the way, and they didn't. The next day, Debbie contracted a blood clot. Doctors had to do emergency surgery on her to put a filter in her veins to keep the blood clot from going to her lungs. The doctor, the anesthesiologist met with him and said, Mr. Williams, she's the most unstable patient I've ever worked on. She could easily die before we get her back here. It was amazing. An hour and a half after surgery, she was back in that room. We found out later on, and I'm glad to hear that you're a prayer warrior, because we found out later on that there were literally thousands of people that Friday night that just felt compelled by God to just set aside and pray for Debbie and the baby. I was in North Carolina a few years ago, and a lady walked up to me about 70 years old. She said, Mr. Wheeler, you don't know me, but I know you. I said, how's that? She said, I have a prayer ministry. She said, I pray about 4 hours every day. She said, I can go back and show you my prayer journal, exactly the time we were talking about, when all this was happening, where God prompted me to write in my prayer journal to pray for a young woman who was pregnant, who was very ill, and I've never known who she was until tonight, and God confirmed that was your wife. Amen. Guys, if that happened once, I think that was just a coincidence. That's happened over and over and over and over and over again. There's power in prayer. Saturday, I went back to the hospital, went to eat lunch, came back after lunch. We heard an emergency call to go to respiratory care. I ran down the hall. Debbie's mom was standing there outside. She wouldn't even go in her daughter's room. There were probably 20 people going into her room. I ran into Debbie's room. I couldn't see anything going on. So I backed out of the room, and I just stood there against the wall, and God took me back to the same passage and said, trust me, for I will always be without you. I distinctly remember that. A few minutes later, my mom came and stood on one side, Debbie's mom came and stood on another. We didn't know that 30 minutes before this, the nurse who was assigned to Debbie that day, it was her first day in respiratory care. She was the only nurse to have any neonatal experience. She was filling in for another nurse who would normally be there who was sick. God just placed her at the right place at the right time. And they had Debbie on a bedpan because she had an infection. When she went to check, she saw that Debbie's mucus plug had come out. She ran out in the hall, called and said, you better call the neonatal care people because the baby's coming down. She went back in that room, and Debbie had miscarried her little baby in that bedpan. She knew exactly what to do. She knew exactly how to handle it, how to take care of it. And, we're standing outside, not knowing a thing that's going on. And about 40 minutes after that little baby was born, we're standing out there with my mom and Debbie's mom, and they wheeled out a little glass incubator, and inside of it is a 14-inch long little 1 pound, 15-ounce little baby girl. She was a 26-week baby. She was supposed to be born March the 10th of 1990, and she was born December 2nd of 1989. She's just that big. They hooked her up to a respirator on the other side of the hospital. I got to hold on to her 3 days later, Debbie's 29th birthday. She weighed 1 pound and 10 ounces. That's the first time I ever got to hold on to her. Let me say this to you. The doctors didn't give Kara a whole lot of hope, and they certainly didn't give Debbie much hope. The doctor told me in 1990 he'd give Debbie about 2 years to live. The disease is that active. It's called Wegener's granulomatosis. It's a autoimmune disease. It's not cancer. Your body just attacks itself. And so I want you to know, about 3.5 weeks after Kara was born, we took Debbie home from the hospital. She had to learn to walk again. She had to learn to feed herself again. Again, they didn't give her much a chance of doing anything. You know what's so amazing about it? Is over the years I've learned so much from Debbie. Just watching her. My students, she loves all my students. She brings candy to them. She cares for them. I watch what Debbie does. That's why Liberty's been so good to us, because it's given our whole family an opportunity to be a part of ministry together. It was interesting. About a year after Debbie got out of the hospital, we did Vacation Bible School. Debbie had gone back in the hospital about 2 or 3 weeks before Vacation Bible School. She wasn't doing well. She had a relapse. And I remember she took over the 3-year-old nursery. Now get this. From Monday to Wednesday, the 3-year-old nursery doubled. Because Debbie would go visit all the families, call. Thursday morning, about 3 o'clock, she wakes me up. Her nose is bleeding. She's sick as she can be. So I got her up. Literally had to carry her from the bed to the bathroom. The next morning at 8:30, she was back in that 3-year-old nursery room keeping those kids and letting them know that. Never said a word. Nobody knew she was sick. I remember walking across the church, and I got accosted by no less than 10 of my church members saying, "Pastor, there's no paper towels in the bathroom. Pastor, these kids are driving me crazy. Pastor, these kids are scratching the walls. Pastor, 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 pastor." I got back on the other side of the church, and I discovered a great mystery. It's not really a mystery, it's just the truth. That the biggest babies in the church often aren't found in the nursery. That's the truth. You know what? It's been amazing to watch Debbie over these years. 5 years ago, she calls me. She got on a medication called Rituxan. For the first time ever, she went into remission. We found out recently that she's out of remission. And she's going to have to go back through the Rituxan this summer. But you'd never know it talking to her. She's amazing lady. We baptized all kinds of our neighbors, even since we've been baptized several on Thomas Road, because Debbie would love on our neighbors and care for them so much and do things for them, even when she was sick. Keep their kids for them. I baptized a Lynchburg police officer, Thomas Road, a while back, and both of his kids, because Debbie loved them so much. Wow. We took Carol home from the hospital the day after Valentine's Day, 1990. She weighed about 5 pounds. They said she didn't walk or function or do anything like that. She started having seizures when she was about 2 years old. Found out when she was 4.5 that they verified that she did have cerebral palsy. She didn't walk till she was 4.5 years old. She's an amazing, amazing kid. That kid, you know, they said, "Oh, she'll never be able to graduate from high school." She graduated from Brookville High School in Lynchburg in the National Honor Society. They said, "She'll never make it through college." She graduated at Liberty in 2013. And Jerry, our president, recognized 3 kids at graduation, and Carol was one of them. 6 months later, Carol was in the Philippines working with families of handicapped children. She now oversees our 24/7 prayer ministry at Liberty. Amazing kid. Guys, we've learned so much over these years how to face tomorrow. What we've learned more than anything about facing tomorrow is that we have to do it with the God who already owns tomorrow. Some of you in this building are hurting because you're facing situations, you're going through stuff, and you don't know what to do. And you're doing what I did. You're fighting back, and it's just making you more miserable. And what God's saying is, why don't you trust me? Why don't you trust me? I created you. I know you. I love you. I've mapped out every breath of your life already. Trust me. Trust me, he said. Wow. We learned 3 things out of this. Number 1, we learned that God is sufficient for every need we ever have. Our first bills out of the hospital were about $360,000 within 6 months. They were $500,000. We lost everything. I had to cash in all my retirement, all that kind of stuff to pay those bills, to stay out of bankruptcy. You know what? It took us 4 years. In 4 years, we kept paying our medical bills. We didn't pay our medical bills in the same year for 4 years. You know what? We never missed a tithe. We never missed a missions offering. We never missed a meal. We never missed anything. God took care of every need we ever needed to have. Number 2, God gave us a phenomenal passion for people who don't know Christ. Because if you'd have seen Debbie 2 weeks before she went in the hospital, she was in aerobics class, healthy. She was on an MVP of her high school softball team. She was on a record-breaking 4x4 relay team in high school. She was a phenomenal athlete. You'd have never thought she would have been sick. And 2 weeks later, after that, she'd be on her deathbed. That neighbor next to you, that friend that you've been putting off sharing the gospel with, how do you know they're going to have another day? Amen. How do you know that? And finally, number 3, something the Lord said to me and Debbie both just a short time after she got out of the hospital, about 2 weeks after she got out of the hospital. She called me in the room one night and she said, "David, God's placed something on my heart. I need to tell you." And I said, "Well, David, God placed something on my heart today when we were, when I was reading the scripture too." It was the same thing. She simply said, and this is what God told both of us, He said, you tell my people that from my perspective, they're wasting way too much time on a bunch of stuff that simply does not matter. Wow. How do you face tomorrow? You face tomorrow, the God who already owns tomorrow. So I'm going to ask you to bow your heads right now. And I'm going to ask you to just come up and just play the guitar like you did this morning, if that'll be okay. And then I'm going to give you an opportunity tonight just to respond. Many of you responded this morning with your families. Tonight, this is much more individual. We don't have to have everybody up there. That's okay. It's just much more individual. I just want you. If we're going to go into revival, we need to have happen what happened at Thursday night. We need to be willing to be broken and crushed. We need to allow God to take our lives and make us what He wants us to be. Amen. We need to say, Father, it is you. It is you. Stop holding on. Let go. Maybe you've never received Jesus Christ, your personal Savior. I don't know. But you got to let go. Many of you came forward this morning praying over your families. Well, what you really need to be doing individually is surrendering to Him. Guys, we play a lot of religious games in church. What I discovered that Thursday night was that all those words, those little platitudes and things that I would say all the time really didn't matter much. What mattered was surrendering to Him. That's what mattered. Come on. Be honest with me tonight. How many of you got things in your life that you're struggling with right now? Raise your hand up. Come on. Yeah. Why don't you take this opportunity? I'm not even going to ask you to stand. I'm going to let you continue to sit. I'm going to ask you, why don't you step up to the altar and just take a moment to deal with the altar. Come on, church.